I didn't tell you last week, but you might have noted, if you read ahead, this is the... All right, in Mark is not a simple structure. I mean, it's a relatively simple structure for Logos to telos. But if you read ahead, you know this. But in Mark, Mark asks the question, who is Jesus? Who is this guy? And that's the Logos to telos is supposed to tell you who is this Jesus guy. That's the whole point. And so the question that is up, the question of the Logos, the argument, logical argument is, could he be the Son of Man? Could he be the Christus, the Anointed One? And could he be the Son of David? Right? Those are the questions. And Mark is beautiful because it proves, as we've seen, it proves that Jesus is God. That's the whole point of the first part of Mark to 8. And then we get the wonderful question, that's a Socratic question. Who do you say that I am? It's incorrectly answered, by the way, which is a beautiful Greek turnabout, which is wonderful. You are the Christus. Stated telos. So right now, Mark proved that Jesus was God, but Peter answers, you're the Christus, you're the Anointed One. Which still begs the question, who is the Son of Man? Who is the Son of David? La, la, la. And also, Jesus never claims to be the Christus, does he? We have just reached the climax of Mark. The climax of Mark is not the crucifixion, according to Jesus' words. The climax of Mark happens in the beginning of 14. It's basically part of 14. I'm going to give you some words of the day, and we're going to get into the, I forgot to mark my place, but we'll get into the climax of Mark. And if you don't get it already, you'll get it by the end of class, because it is so obvious in the text, in the Greek, that you cannot miss it. Matter of fact, the words of the day that we'll have basically fit it right in there. Here's K-A-T-A, kata, K-E-I-M-E-N-O-U. Katimeo. Katimeo. Basically, katikimeo. This word means, kata means down, D-O-W-N, and this means to lie. It doesn't mean to lie down exactly, but it's really close. There are two words we use to recline in Greek. To recline to eat, this is one of them. This word doesn't just mean to recline to eat, though. This means to recline for almost any reason. But when he say katikemeo, it means, well, I'm going to recline. Why do people recline? To sleep. In the day, why do they recline? To eat, unless you're a slave, because slaves have to sit. But if you recline, if you're a free person. And why else would you recline during the day? If you were ill. This word means, by the way, is applied to corpses. So when you say that a corpse, you know, they tell you that you should walk around a lot, right? And they even have this thing where people, although now they're saying it's not healthy for you, but you know, they say you should stand up at your workstation, right? And they even have workstations to stand up now. And they say people don't walk around enough. It was so unusual for people to lie down in the ancient world that this word is applied to corpses, because a corpse has to lie down, right? So when you recline to eat, they use this word. There's another word too. Remember, we have another word, and I didn't look it up, but it's in the previous chapters, that is also used to mean recline to eat. But this word has a little different meaning. You see, although it's still translated to recline, right, in English, unfortunately. Do you see what Mark is doing? The whole point of Mark, what did Jesus tell the disciples right in 8? Right after Peter said, you are the Christus, and he said, what must happen to the Son of Man? He never said he was the Son of Man, but what must happen? Has to be taken, he has to be surrendered, to the authorities, he has to be killed, and he will resurrect from the dead. He will, egerio ek nekros, rise from the dead in Mark. So, Mark is using terminology. He is changing his terminology to do what for you, if you're Greek? Point you to the actions of the Christus, or the actions of the Son of Man. So this word means to recline to eat, but it also can mean a corpse just lying there. K-E-P-H, that's a P-A-L-E-S. Kaphela, this is a word that means a head. And I love to give you guys a whole meaning, because this word does not mean head in the head of the sense of the head. It means a head in the sense of the head. And in Greek, it means the head in the sense of something you seize. We don't think of the head in the sense of something you seize, right? Can you see already their culture, right? Wrestling and warfare. Wrestling and warfare. Okay, in our worldview, a head is very important for what?
Living.
Well, keeping your hat on, right? And your glasses and your eyes, and right, yeah. Well, we know that you think with your brain. But they didn't know, matter of fact, where did they think you thought with? Your gut. Your seat of your emotions was your gut. They had no idea that the brains happened to be in the head. No idea. That had to do with anything with thinking. So, to us, it may be something you put your hat on, but to the Greeks, it was specifically something that you could seize. That in warfare, that's why the head is specifically not the person in charge, but rather it has nothing to do with that. There are other words used, primus, etc., etc. Even in Latin is like that. So, kaphela, I threw the word in, I just want to remind you of that, but it has a different connotation to us. However, kaphela is very important within the context of the verses we're going to look at. This is K-A-T-E. This is actually kata, the same kata. Down, C-H-E. This is C-H-E-E-N. The word is katachein, katacheo. Katacheo means to pour. Down, pour. Or down, something over. Pour something over. Not a downpour like water. S-U-N-T-R-I-P-S-A-S-A. This is a word that I had before. This is a word before. Am I missing a letter? Am I missing a letter in this? Sunatribu. Oh no, this is the word I'm missing. Sunatribu. Sun means what? Together. And this is tribeo, tribesesa, whatever. Tribsesa, anyway. Tribsesa, I can't pronounce that. It's all right. Half the Greek things are Greek to me too. Together, crush or break. This means to crush together. P-O-L-U-T-E-L-O-U-S. Polutelos. Telos? Polu. Polu means much or many. This is the word. I did not want you to miss this word. It is translated in the text as extremely expensive, which isn't necessarily a bad translation. But many telos. I mean, that's what, remember Jesus took the four up on the side of the mountain of Mount Olives and said, he said literally, although we mistranslated, I'm going to tell you about the end times. I'm going to tell you about the telos. I'm going to give you a telos. And he did, right? Polotelos means many telos. And a telos can be a bill. Polotelos can mean very expensive. But it also can mean many conclusions or many answers to the question. N-A-R-O-U, nardo, nard. This is a foreign word extraction. We see it. And this one I had to give you, alaboastron, in alabastron. Alabastron, that's a alabaster jar box, as we were talking about. So,
Hey, Lionel.
yeah.
Your sheets you have chapter 13, but this should be 14, shouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it should be. I thought I changed it to 14 last week. Oh well, I'll pick it. I'll make it right. We are in 14. It's 14. I'll go back for just a second. We get a statement. Now remember, the whole point of Mark is to prove who is this Jesus. And we have this whole session, the questions at hand, the questions of the Logos to tell us is, who is the Son of Man? The who is the Christus was kind of answered, but Jesus never told you, right? You were never told who is the anointed. And you never were told who is the Son of David. By the way, if you're the Son of David, who is anointed? Who is the anointed? Whoever the Son of David is, because that's what the anointed is the Son of David. Who do you anoint? Prophets, priests, and kings. Okay? So, the anointed, the Christus, has got to be the Son of David. This whole work is pointing to this point. So I want to remind you, let's go back to 1 and 2. I'm not going to expose or do an expose on these two. I just wanted to remind you. In 1:14, now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, the Grammateus, were zeto. They weren't looking, they sought for some delos, decoy, to creto, to retain Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast. And by the way, it's not feast. Not during the holy day. They lego, or the people, the laos, the people in general, may cause a disturbance. So they were really worried about the Roman reaction to a disturbance by the people. Now this is right here, the next verse, is a crisis, is a climax of Mark. While he was in Bethany, reclining, katakimeo, reclining to eat, in the home of a man named Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar, and basically gune is a wife. So woman is wife. Yes, it's a woman who is a wife. Came with an alabaster jar, an alabastron. And remember, I told you an alabastron jar would be made. It would be a sealed jar. And, I maybe didn't explain this fully, but it would have a small hole in it so you could heat the alabastron. The point of doing it is full of nard, myrrh and nard. Basically a very, very costly and expensive perfume. You heated it with your hands, and then you dropped a little bit out of a hole. But it's an alabastron jar, so what you can do with it is what she does with it. And it says, and we translate expensive, but the word is polotelos, many telos. Now, Greek is full of this kind of word use. Remember I told you, Greek is absolutely concrete. But here is a euphemistic or ambiguous use of the word in Greek. Because it can mean very expensive, but it can also mean polotelos, many conclusions or answers. She brought an alabastron full of myrrh, and of nard, of pure nard, and she shattered it. She shattered the jar made of alabaster. And I told you last week, the way that she would probably shatter this thing is she would wrap it in a piece of cloth. And remember, cloth isn't just laying around. In our country, we got cloth. In the modern era, there's cloth everywhere. But to make cloth is a very expensive process. It had to be hand done. Anybody made hand cloth? No, probably not. And you have to take it, you have to shear it off the sheep, right? No cotton. You have to shear off the sheep, and then you have to take it to a spindle, and you have to make it into a piece of yarn, right? And then you have to take the yarn, and you have to put it in a weave, into a loom, and you have to make it, with the weave, you have to weave it, or you have to, crochet it, or, I think that's even modern. I don't think people used crocheting methods or whatever methods in the ancient world. So you had to make things out of, and it took hours and hours, and so the cost was very expensive for anything. So it says she's a gune. So a gune must have what? Has to have a head covering. She has to have a head covering, because a veil of some type. Unmarried woman would go bareheaded, but a married woman, that's why you knew she was a gune, was because she had a head covering. So she probably took her head covering off. Now this also has a meaning within the culture that's obviously missing in our culture, right? What does it mean if you take your head covering off, if you're a woman? Yeah, that is something you didn't do except in extremes. Right? Only your husband was supposed to be able to take off your head covering. So she took, probably, I'm going to guess she took her head covering. Okay, if you're not there, there are not a whole other pieces of clothing she can take off to do this with. I mean, it's not like you can crush it, because what's the next thing say? It says, she poured it down on his, and the perfume is added, on his kafela. So she poured it down on his head. So it would be very difficult for her to take, for example, her sleeves and do this, or her hem and do this, or take off her clothes, shemeon, or petapolis to do this. So it was probably her head covering, unless she could have brought another piece of cloth. But in any case, she basically crushed this, and the way you did this is you would crush it in a piece of you would heat it first. Remember I told you last week, you heat it, and then you would crush it, and then you would drip it down over someone's head. And so this was probably a very small jar, vase, they're usually you can put them in your hand. And alabaster is a kind of a fragile material. So that's the way she did it. Now look what it says. Let's see, is there anything else? Yes. Let's look at 4. Some of those who are present were legoed. That legoed indignantly, the word is agakiteo, greatly afflicted. They were greatly afflicted. They were embarrassed. Why were they embarrassed? What would cause them so much pain and suffering? A woman.
Yeah, she obviously making a spectacle of herself.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's very unusual. It would be odd today.
Yeah, it would be odd today. Imagine the same thing today. In their culture, this is completely outside of the norm. In the Greek culture, this is outside of the norm. Who would you do this for? And who would do it? For a priest or a king, right? Or for someone who is dead. Katameo, right? Someone who is dead, a corpse. That's who you would do this for. And who would do it? Who would anoint a priest or a king? The high priest or prophet, someone, remember, to all those guys? This is a gune, a woman. Now, I do want to go back and point out something. Remember, in Orthodox Judaism, although they don't say it, but we know this is true because this is the truth in the thing. What is the highest creation what is the highest creature in the creation? A woman. Woman was created last. She is the highest peak of creation. And the Jews believe this. This is an Orthodox Jewish position. However, there are issues culturally for the Greeks especially. Because the Greeks don't think that. And by the way, do the Jews really subscribe to that viewpoint completely? No. They're supposed to, but they don't, right? Right? When Paul wrote about women being covered in the church, remember that? Who are crowned? The highest peak of creation are crowned. The kings, prophets, priests. That's why a woman, by the way, you women are not taking advantage. Well, one is taking advantage of the fact that you can come into a building or a church before the Almighty God with your head covered because you are the peak of creation. That's what Paul writes about. That's what the Orthodox Jews write about. Here is a woman who comes to Mark already proved to the Greeks that Jesus was God. So here's a woman that comes to a God, takes off her head covering. She's the peak of creation, right? Crushes an alabastron jar and covers his head with nard, with basically perfume. There is not a whole lot of ways to look at this. A woman would most appropriately be anointing the dead. But he ain't dead. Okay? But look what it says. Some of them are present, legoed indignantly. Why is this waste of Muron, of perfumed oil, literally? In 5. It could have been sold for more than a year's wages. That's 300 denarion. That's a lot of bucks. 300 denarion is, I didn't calculate in esses, which are gold, but this is 300 pieces of silver coin, pieces of silver. 300 years' wages, or days' wages, a year's wages. And the money given to the pochos, to the beggars. And they rebuked her harshly. Literally in the Greek, it's they embryeomai. They snorted with anger. So the word rebuked her harshly probably is good culturally for us, but this is a different kind of culture. In this culture, you don't go and rebuke people directly. I mean, that's like not done. So what they did is they were snorting, whatever. They're making discouraging sounds toward her. And this is what Jesus says in 6. Leave her alone. Literally, sin. The word is apthemi. Apthemi. Apthemi is the same word used when it says for your sins to be forgiven. Apthemi is to send your sins away. Literally, don't bother her. Don't, send away your thoughts. Said, epo, Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a kalos, a beautiful ergon, a beautiful toil, and a beautiful action to me. And this is where you are going to get it. 7. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you not always have me. And look what he says in 8. She did what she could. She poured perfume, murizo, an unguent. She applied an unguent. Basically, she Christoed him on my soma, beforehand to prepare for my burial, my ephitheos, the preparation for interment. And then I'm going to go and read the last part. We're going to talk about this for a second. I lego you, amen. I lego you the truth, amen. Wherever the euangelion, the good news from the gods, is carusa, is proclaimed throughout the world, not the world, the cosmos, the created universe. What she has done will also be lelo, will be told commonly, not lego, but be told commonly in mimizod, in a memory of her. This is the peak of Mark. Because what just happened? What just happened in the context of Mark?
Christ was anointed.
Christ was anointed to be what?
The Messiah.
He was anointed the Christus, which means he's the son of David, which means he's the son of man, and he was God. And look who anointed him. The peak of creation anointed him. And he was anointed with an enormously costly, what was happening here is he was anointed with the highest and greatest thing that he could be anointed with. To the Greek reader and to the Hebrew reader, this, what is obvious, becomes obvious to you when we explain it, right, within the context of what's going on. If we understand that the question in Mark is, who is Jesus? And we see that the Logos is about the Son of Man, the Christus, the Son of David, then it becomes obvious. When he is anointed, and is he anointed any other time? Not when he's alive. He is anointed for burial after he's dead. But if you anoint somebody when they're dead, What good is that, right? I mean, I guess it smells good for a couple of days, but, you know, it's part of the burial ceremonies, but it's meaningless once you're dead. But Jesus is anointed here. And so the readers of this text, remember, Jesus told them in 13, I am going to give you a telos. And he did. He told them all these things will happen before the end of its generation. And then the next step we move into is the announcement. Basically, this is the announcement of Christ and who he is. Now, if you weren't clear on this, because, well, Jesus himself says it. How many other people in Mark, how many other people in all the other Gospels? Do you remember Jesus saying that this person, there's a mnemosum, a reminder in memory forever, for eternity, to a person? I assure you, when you walk through the pearly gates, the first thing you're going to see on the other side of the pearly gates is a memorial probably to this woman. Well, she'll probably have a name then, and we'll know who she is, which is really cool. She might even shake your hand. I'm just saying, okay, that's theological, right? Just touch the theological pool. But I'm just saying, you know, it's kind of amazing to me, right? I don't have a problem with it. You know, we do things, we taught in memorial to Christ. This is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But literally, Jesus said that what she has done will be a memorial to her for eternity, forever and ever, right? Yeah.
What correlation does this have to the earlier comments about getting rid of stuff? And also the value when just not too long before Christ pointed out the widow that gave her last thing.
Yes.
What is, I mean, we don't know anything about her. We don't know if she's wealthy. We don't know how she procured this. But what is the point of it being of tremendous value when Jesus had just talked about it's not the amount that you give, it's what portion of yourself you give.
I think that, you know, I had that in my notes, something to mention something about that. So thank you for asking that question, because that is beautiful. Because what you just said is precisely the point of this. Remember, we're still following that logos to telos down about stuff. I mean, sorry if I don't mention, you know, all these logos to teloses are parallels to each other. And it's not like they're complete. It's just they're following on one another. And so you're correct. In 12, we had that whole thing that was ended about the widow's leptons, not her mites, the leptons. And they weren't copper. They were probably iron, but okay, I'll give you if they're brass or copper. They were really low-value coins. But she gave the last. And remember, the problem with that was she gave them to the temple, and yet the next thing in the 13 is the destruction of the temple. So she was giving it to them with there was no value to it, right? No value to her, no value to anything, to the creation. And now we see a contrast that maybe isn't so much a contrast. Because we get through 13, and 13 doesn't talk much about, well, it does. It talks about stuff. It talks about really personal stuff, like children and people. But then when we get to 14, the first thing we get is, now we have a woman who takes, we don't know if it's her last bit, or, you know, in the other Gospels it gives us the impression that she could have been a prostitute or someone that, you know, who did, that was all she had, right? Maybe, you know, we don't know. It could even be Mary Magdalene. I mean, there are some, you know, that's in other Gospels, but I won't cloud that by going too much. I'm just reminding you. But the fact is, what she did, okay, where the other woman gave everything she had to the temple that would be destroyed, this woman gave an enormous amount to anoint the temple that what? would be destroyed, but raised again. That's what Jesus kept saying, right? So, if we were going to evaluate them, who gave the most important and fitting? Well, Jesus answered it himself. There is not a memnon, there's not a mimozon, there's not a reminder for the widow, the widow's mite, right? Or the widow who gave to this, for the temple that would be destroyed. But yet Jesus said there will be a mimozon, there will be a reminder forever for the woman who anointed him.
But I tell you, in our culture, we, as kids, as adults, who do we hear most about, though? The widow's mite. We never hear about this. This isn't brought up, isn't taught, isn't brought out. But Jesus did say, I forgot, he said that she's going to be remembered for forever.
I agree, and Mary, I would argue that every church should have a little thing with maybe a little alabaster, carving on it that says, in memorial to the woman who anointed Christ, the Son of Man, the Son of David, the Christus. What is unique about this is no one else was going to do it. The disciples weren't going to do it, right? They're clueless. They really, Mark, if we go look at Matthew, John, they get a little bit better fare. Not too much, but they get a little fare. In Mark, they're just, even Mark says, Jesus says, are you guys stupid? He's just pounding them all the time. And I think Mark probably gives us a very clear kind of Greek view of the Jesus-disciple relationship. However, we have, in this case, Jesus doesn't make any logos to her, right? Whatever the logos was already sunk in. The Greeks got this. And yet, and here's the thing, if you want a greater, there's only one greater commandment that we don't do. You know what that is, right? I'm skipping, but in John, what's the commandment we don't do that we ought to be doing? Wash the feet. Do ye likewise. In the Last Supper in John, Jesus washed the feet of the disciples and said, do ye likewise. And there are some churches that do ye likewise, but there's some that don't. Well, we could get in real trouble for that, right? I'm not saying get in real trouble for this. I'm just saying Jesus said this. Well, I didn't say it. It's in Greek right here. Okay? It's Greek. It may be Greek to you, but even our translation says it. So,
well, what would Pontius Pilate say? What would the Sanhedrin say if they witnessed this? You've just anointed a king. Uh-oh, we now have political problems.
yeah, well,
Another thing, though, is she humbled herself in the ultimate, in front of a room full of witnesses.
What was she doing with a bunch of men?
that's brought out a little bit in the other Gospels if you compare them in a kind of parallel structure. But I don't want to do that because I don't want to detract from the beautiful and power of this. But yeah, what you said is exactly right. She not only bared her head, okay, and if you look at this, the other imagery the imagery that is obvious to the Greeks and the Hebrews in this culture, what is it? Bridal imagery, right? The bridegroom, she was a gune, she was a woman, she was wearing a wife's scarf. So, you don't know where she comes from, what her, stage of life, or anything about her, right? It doesn't tell us. We just know that she was a wife, a woman who was married. And so she had her head covered, most likely. That's how you knew she was a gune. And I just proposed to you that she probably used her head covering. I don't know if she did or not. I'm just saying, most likely, if you go through logically and say, what could she use? She either brought it with her, she probably couldn't afford anything after that, right? After buying this wonderful thing. Yeah.
I looked up nard, and it was made from a plant that only grows in the Himalayas, so it's not something you can just go down to the Agora
and pick up for a few pennies,
yeah,
right?
It's pretty rare stuff.
I'm not sure if it's only in the Himalayas, but that's okay. I mean, that makes,
According to
there's,
this.
the thing is, it is really rare stuff. And yeah, that is correct. It is so rare. Whatever this stuff is, it's so rare that the value of it, number one, the value of it, it went into an alabastron box.
The jar itself is expensive.
The little jar that it came in is super expensive. And these things are probably big enough to fit in your hand. So about like this. I mean, it's probably about exactly this size. This is how big it is, about like this. We've seen them. If you go look on the internet, you'll probably see pictures of alabastron boxes. And they usually have carvings and stuff on them. And the alabastron box itself would probably take, days, maybe weeks to make one, to carve it and make it and shape it and fit it and do it and put it together. And then you have stuff in it that is so valuable that they say it's worthy of, and again, our perspective of wages, our perspective of money. Remember, I told you how much did a book cost in the ancient world? Remember, a book would cost approximately the amount that you could expend to buy 40 acres. That's how much a book was. That's the value of a scroll in the ancient world. You probably could get a good sale at Walmart in the Agora, but maybe on sale you could get it for maybe 20 acres.
Used books.
But 300 denarii, 300 pieces of silver. Think about a year's wages for us. It's equivalent. It's an equivalent for let's say a laborer. So say $30,000 equivalent. I mean, a book isn't quite that much, but what an expense! What an incredible expense! And so, I can't say too much about this specific piece because this is, we could probably go on, and we could build and build and build, but these small, what is this? 10 verses, 9 verses, less than that, 7 verses, 7 statements. Remember, verses are added. Is the point. This is the climax. Because everything after this, if the point of Mark is to ask the question, who is Jesus, what just happened in these verses? It just answered the question.
Lionel, to Tammy's point, why were the early Christian fathers and in our modern understanding, why does this have such a diminished role? Which, you pointed out what Christ said. Why was it not a big deal to anybody else but Christ?
I think it was a big deal to the Greeks. Remember, the thing is that we are in the Mysterion. This is Mysterion. And so the Greeks got it. The Greeks really got it. And Paul explained to the Christians, no free, no slave, no man, no woman, right? And so I think the early church did get it. I think the problem that we had is as we began to move into the modern era, the problem that you're having, I hate to say this because I'm not big into, I believe that cultures do what cultures do to survive. So cultures usually don't change. Cultures are the most survivable mechanism that they have, and cultures change for the purpose of survival. So why do you see so many patriarchal societies, for example, in the ancient world?
It worked.
Well, you survived. Women and children could not survive. If you look at the Middle East today, women and children can't survive without protection. And so who's going to protect them? You can't, unless you have somebody strong, a man, father, whatever. When might makes right, you better have some might. And until Colt came along with a 44, nowadays a woman can be as strong as a man because she can, well, not in France or in a lot of countries, she can't carry a weapon. But if you can carry a weapon, you can exceed the strength of a man because you can whip out your 44 and you can shoot him. So, technology and cultures give people things. And so in our culture, for example, we have police. We have freedom of, we have the freedom to have weapons, right? And so we can protect ourselves. In other cultures in the ancient world, how many police were there in this culture? 0. And what's a soldier going to do for you? A soldier is more likely to rape you than he is to help you, right? That's just the way the world was in that period. And so the cultures, as your culture progresses. So I would argue, I'm sorry, I have to argue this, I think that in many cases, the culture at the time wanted to ensure that we didn't remember, for example, that women are the peak of creation. How many classes have you ever heard this in? Right? I mean, this is, if you go look at the Greek, the Roman and the Hebraic documents, especially Hebraic documents, you'll look at the Talmud, and you'll find where it talks about it over and over again. As a matter of fact, women are the only ones that can do the blessing of the light. No man can do the blessing of the light. Women don't have to do certain other mitzvahs that men do. And the reason is because they're the peak of creation. But if we forget that, if we're not taught that, then where are we left with, right? There is no place in the Bible, by the way, that it says that women are to be subjected under their husbands, that wives are subject under their husbands. It doesn't say that in the Greek. It doesn't say in the Hebrew. It says, the biggest it says is two become one. If two are one, who's the leader? There is no leader if two are one. It can't happen. I mean, that would be kind of funny, wouldn't it? It'd be like you had two heads. And one head says, I want to go over here. And one said, I want to go over here. And you're like fighting. No, if two are one, you have two heads and you're both thinking the same, right? And if you're not in whatever with each other. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be controversial. I'm just...
Oh, this hand thing about the protection, that's what applies to that other passage about submit to.
Right, because the word hupe, what's the word? Hupe. The word means it's one of the hupe words. And the hupe words mean hupo. It means under. It's not hupe telos. I don't think it's hupe telos, but it's under. The word means an overseer. It means, like, for example, the word is used, it says, in that verse where you're talking about, that is horribly mistranslated in English, that says, as God is the head of Christ, and Christ is the head of man, so man is the head, literally a husband is the head of a wife. Okay, the word used is kaphela, and kaphela in Greek does not mean what it means in English. Kaphela only means the thing that you seize in a wrestling match, or the thing that you stick out in a fight to protect the other guy. And so what it literally means in Greek, and if you go look at the verse before it, it says that Jesus is under, it specifically says that Jesus is the overseer under God. In other words, he has the authority under God. And so if you read it in the correct sense, it says, as God stands to protect Jesus, or Christ, Christ stands to protect a man, and the man stands to protect a woman, his wife. In other words, the point of a man, and by the way, this is a point of Christianity. When someone is firing shots at other people, what should the Christian be doing, according to our understanding?
Protecting them.
He should be running ahead to either protect them with his body and take the shots, or take out the shooter. Because in Christianity, Christians believe that and this is a theological thing, but this is right out of the New Testament. Jesus would say, what matters? Not your stuff, right? What you do with your stuff is what matters. And by the way, the stuff, right? The widow and the lepton, she gave all her stuff, which Jesus would say, that's great. What did this woman who anointed him do? We don't know if she gave all her stuff, but do you see the imagery here? She gave her stuff, all of her stuff, including her character. Because everybody who saw her do this would be like, well, they were indignant, right? They're embarrassed. They're making funny sounds at her. And yet what she did was the peak of the point of Mark. There is more to this. It continues on in 10. Then Judas Iscariot, there's a direct connection between this logos and telos in the other Gospels. There is not a direct connection in this one. It says, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priest to betray Jesus. Now what I want to point out to you, we'll read the 11, 10, 11. They were delighted. Literally, they were chario, grace. They gave him grace. They were chario, delighted to hear this, and promised to give him argion, silver. So he watched for an opportunity, a eukarios, a good time, to hand him over, to paradidomai, to surrender him. Remember the word Jesus used? Paradidomai, to surrender. So they looked for a good time to surrender. Exactly the words that Jesus used. I mean, this isn't missed on the Greek audience. Now, what I want to point out is how much did the other Gospels tell us, how much did Judas Iscariot betray Jesus for? 30 pieces. And how much did, oh no, a slave is much more than 30 pieces of silver.
10% of
Yeah,
300.
that I know where you heard that, but slaves are much more costly than that. Yeah, a costly slave is probably at least 100, maybe 100 pieces of silver for an inexpensive slave. But 30 pieces of silver. How much did the woman do?
10%.
300.
It's 10%.
300.
Well,
This is not missed.
are we, just a small point,
Yeah.
so are we saying that, the 30 denarii, why didn't they say that? Why did they say 30 pieces of silver? Are one and the same, I guess we're supposed to know that?
Is this a standard?
No.
Not a big deal.
I'm
Just curious.
cheating. I'm doing exactly what I tell you you shouldn't do.
Okay.
You see, we shouldn't. I think it is.
You read the book.
We've read the book, right? We know what the other Gospels say, so it really is not legitimate for us to go to the other Gospels unless we're doing a comparison course, right? If we were doing a comparison course, that'd be A-okay.
This one's
But
got
we're really not. But I'm tossing it out because we all know it, right? But I think it's ironic. Now, did the Greeks know when it says that they would give him money? The point is that when it says they would give him silver, you see in the previous one, it said it was a year's wages. It didn't say how much. It said a year's wages, which we take to be about 365 denarii, right? This one, it just says they'll give him silver. It doesn't say money. It says silver. So if he's given him silver, what does it have to be?
More valuable.
Well, no, denarii.
Denarii.
It has to be denarii. Or,
But his question was, is one piece of silver 1 denarii?
yes,
Okay.
yes. I'm sorry.
That's what he was asking.
I'm sorry. I didn't
No,
catch
that's
those
okay.
questions.
No, go ahead.
Because I wonder why they didn't say, well, first I guess they didn't say it here either. It's
Well-
very costly. Elbas West, North costly.
It just says
They're just
like-
saying it could have been sold for.
A year's
okay,
wages.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, and you got to realize too, why did the writer do this? I mean, really, Mark. I think Mark is really being. You can look at it two ways. You can look at it theologically. Why would Mark express it this way? Or you could look at it culturally. Why would Mark express it this way? Mark, we think, is writing to the Greeks and the Romans, right? So why would he express it as a year's wages? And why would he express it as silver? What would be his point? If I told you that it was, let's say, 300 denarii, if you lived in the culture that used a denarius, you would go, I understand. If I use a year's wages, everyone can understand that, right?
Universal.
It's a universal comparison. So Mark isn't stupid. Mark realizes he's writing, well, they do happen to use denarii in Rome. That happens to be the tender that's used around the world. But I think Mark is smart enough to realize that his writing isn't just for the Romans and for the Greeks. You know, it'll apply to other groups and people. And there's where the theological comes in. Why write it in Greek? Why would God have it written in Greek in the first place? And why have this really cool language that's, you know, not so specific to the culture?
In the fullness of time.
Just saying. I don't think God or Jesus are dumb, and I think Mark is a pretty smart guy too, and I think his writing is pretty phenomenal. Yes, ma'am.
So was the anointing by the woman the last straw for Judas? I mean, it just follows right on the heels of that. Did that send him? Did he say, okay, I've had it, I'm out of here?
Beautiful question, because that's in my notes too. The thing is that, you know, in the other Gospels, we get the impression that Jesus directly confronted Judas. In Mark, it doesn't, because the big deal is this. In Mark, who is the people messing up in Mark? The disciples. And I think that what Mark is trying to do is it's cast us all in the role of the disciples. We may all think we're Mathetes. We may all think that we're following Christ. But the point is that Christ says, get rid of your stuff. You know, it doesn't mean give away all your things. He means mentally, emotionally, physically, you got to get rid. You know, you got to dump your stuff to be in the kingdom of heaven. And he also tells us all the time that the big deal is that it's your thinking, right? It's the way you think and what you do with your thinking. That's the whole focus of a lot of Christ's talking. I mean, the Logos to tell us the whole thing. So, you know, he's casting us. Mark is casting us in the role of disciples, the readers. And he doesn't want you to miss this, right? So, who betrayed Jesus? Yeah, it's not just Judas. I bet all the disciples. Well, who wasn't thinking negatively about this woman? If you ask Peter, what did Peter say? He would have snorted too, right? I'm snorting, you know, right? He even snorted with Paul in the room. Yes, sir.
I can't remember the name of the book, but I read some years ago. It was written by someone that felt that Judas got a bad rap, in the sense that Judas was, just like you were saying, Judas was not unique in believing that the kingdom of Christ was an earthly kingdom. And I heard the expression, this was the last straw, meaning that he did that in order to force Christ's hand, hoping that Christ would rise up and they would have an earthly kingdom rather than the heavenly kingdom that no one grasped. And that, you know, somebody had to do it, and he did it. I mean, he's portrayed strictly as a villain where, I mean, no one knows for sure, but the motive may have been, Jesus, you're the one that doesn't get it. We want you to kick the Rome. We want you to kick the Romans' butt. We want an earthly kingdom.
What you say is, I think that is a precisely correct Greek understanding of what's going on. Because, okay, all right. In English, we expect novels to be written this way. And by the way, this ain't too bad for a novel form. Because in a novel, you have the initial scene, you have the rising action, you have the climax, you have the falling action, and you have the denouement. So, what we have here is this is the climax. Everything else is falling action. And so the climax, the peak is Jesus is anointed, the Son of Man, the Christ is the Son of David. And the reaction of Judas is, and by the way, the reaction may be of the other, well, we do know the reaction of the other disciples. We'll see it later. But the reaction of Judas is immediately to surrender him. They use the word betray. I really wish they wouldn't, because that's not the word that's used in the Greek. The word is surrender Jesus. So in other words, he wasn't, probably even in his mind, he wasn't betraying him, right? He's simply surrendering him to the authorities. So he's either following the, well, I don't know, following the law of the time.
Jesus even said, I'm going to be surrendered to the authorities.
Yeah.
In some convoluted way, could he have thought undoing what Jesus said was going to happen?
I'm not gonna apologize for any of the disciples, but I do think that's, I think what you brought up is a really interesting point. What I think is really key, though, is to the Greek reader and to us, because we see it. The climax results in Judas making a decision to go to the people that, look, right before this, what did it say? They were looking for an opportunity to take him into custody and kill him. And then we have this anointing, and the next step is we have an avenue for him to be surrendered, right, to them. I mean, that's where it is. And by the way, the next thing that happens, and this is what we'll get into next week. And by the way, I intend to teach class next week, is there anybody who doesn't want to have class next week? Because they're going to have the stewardship thing. And I told the church that I would. They're going to have Dan Myers or somebody doing a class. If a lot of people aren't going to be here, then I could, not teach.
Well, I'll vote. I'm not gonna be here, so I would rather you wait.
There, sounds like, yeah.
I'm out of town again, so.
So you want me to not teach class or teach class?
I'd be here.
You'll be here?
I'll be here.
Well, I'll tell you what.
I'll be where you are.
I'll prepare a lesson and I'll bring it in, and if there's like 3 people here, maybe we'll do a preparatory and do it again, because some of this stuff is really fun anyway to look back at. But I don't know. That's kind of the way we'll look at it. But the most important thing I want you to go back if you reread Mark and see how this fits, because, like I said, this is the climax to Mark. Everything else is following action to the denouement. And by the way, the denouement in Mark. What's the denouement? What is the last part of Mark, really? The crucifixion, resurrection. Not much of the resurrection. So in other words, to the Greek reader, the most important part of Mark is not... Why, and I'll just ask this real quick question. Why isn't the most important part the death and resurrection of Christ in the context of Mark? Why isn't that the climax? Okay, we'll talk about it next week. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us and take care of us. In your name we pray.
Amen.